Voyager 1 arrived expecting to see something familiar. A small moon circling a giant planet should have looked ancient, cold, scarred by impacts and frozen in place for ages. Instead, the spacecraft caught something moving. Above the surface of Io, enormous plumes were rising into space. Material was erupting from the ground itself. The landscape was not sitting still. It was changing. That immediately created a problem. Worlds this small are supposed to cool down. Their internal energy should fade away. Over time, they become quiet. Their surfaces preserve the past instead of rewriting it. Io was doing the opposite. The eruptions meant heat was still being produced somewhere below the surface. Not once, not briefly, continuously. The visible evidence was impossible to ignore. A moon that should have been geologically dead was behaving like an active world. Every eruption pushed the same conclusion harder. The surface was revealing energy that should not exist. Io was no longer an ordinary moon. Something inside the Jupiter system was keeping it alive, and the source remained completely hidden. The first explanation seemed reasonable. Maybe Io was simply holding on to heat from its formation. Maybe the moon started hot and never fully cooled. If that were true, the volcanoes would not require anything unusual. They would just be the last traces of an ancient process slowly fading away. But the volcanoes were no longer the surprise. The surprise was how long they had been doing it. Every attempt to treat the eruptions as leftover heat ran into the same obstacle. The energy being released was simply too large. The activity was too widespread. A moon the size of Io should have cooled long before the present day. The numbers kept pointing in the same direction. The explanation was running out of room. The simplest explanation began to disappear. If the volcanoes were still active after all this time, then they could not be running on leftover energy alone. The heat was not just surviving, it was being replenished. That changed what Io was. The moon could no longer be treated as an isolated object carrying the last embers of its past. Something was continuing to feed energy into it right now. The eruptions were not relics. They were evidence of an active process still operating across the Jupiter system. The only remaining question was where that energy was coming from, because nothing visible on Io looked capable of supplying it. A possible answer finally began to take shape. Io does not move through Jupiter's gravity unchanged. During every orbit, the giant planet pulls on the moon with tremendous force. The effect is not simply attraction. Io is repeatedly stretched and compressed. That changes the picture completely. Instead of drifting through Jupiter's gravity unchanged, Io was being worked on continuously. Every orbit became another squeeze. Every squeeze forced the interior to shift. Every shift created friction. And every cycle turned a little more motion into heat. Suddenly, the volcanoes no longer look impossible. If Jupiter is constantly squeezing Io, then friction inside the moon could be generating enormous amounts of energy. The heat would not need to survive from the distant past. It could be produced continuously in the present. For the first time, the mystery appears close to resolution. Jupiter begins to look less like a neighbor and more like an engine. Io becomes the object being worked on, shaped and heated by a force that never fully lets go. The explanation feels powerful because it matches what is being observed. Yet one problem remains. If Jupiter is doing all the work, why does the process continue so effectively instead of gradually settling down and weakening over time? The new explanation looked solid until the orbit itself entered the picture. If Jupiter alone were squeezing Io, the process should gradually calm down. Each cycle would drain away a little of the instability. The orbit would become more circular. The stretching would weaken. The heating would fade. But that is not what happened. The missing energy was not hiding inside Io at all. Io remained active. The volcanoes kept erupting. The interior kept generating heat. The system refused to settle. Something was preventing the process from reaching equilibrium. When astronomers traced the motion of the moons around Jupiter, they found a hidden pattern. Io was not moving through the system alone. Europa and Ganymede were pulling on it repeatedly. Their gravitational interactions arrived at precise intervals over and over again. The effect was almost invisible. Every time the orbit tried to settle, the pattern disturbed it again. Every time the heating should have weakened, the system pushed it back toward instability. The process kept resetting itself. The Jupiter-only explanation collapsed. Jupiter was still supplying the force, but Jupiter was not acting alone. Io's heat was emerging from a larger machine. 3 moons were participating in the same gravitational system, and each orbit helped preserve the behavior of the others. The moons stopped looking like separate worlds. One moon was helping move the others. The others were helping keep Io geologically alive. Suddenly, the volcanoes looked less like a feature of a single moon and more like evidence of a hidden system operating across the entire Jovian neighborhood. And if that system could transform Io so completely, it raised a much larger possibility. What else had those same gravitational relationships been doing to the other moons all this time? The discovery on Io no longer stands alone. The same gravitational rhythm that keeps Io active extends beyond a single moon. As energy is exchanged through the system, the effects reach Europa and Ganymede as well. Their motions are connected. Their futures are connected. What happens to one moon helps shape what happens to the others. That changes the meaning of everything Voyager 1 saw. The towering volcanic eruptions were the first visible clue, but they were never the entire story. The plumes, the lava, and the constant resurfacing were signs of a larger process, already operating across multiple worlds. The system behaves like a machine that never fully switches off. One orbit influences the next. One gravitational pull helps sustain another. Energy continues moving through the system, maintaining conditions that would gradually disappear if each moon traveled around Jupiter independently. The volcanoes remain the most dramatic evidence because they can be seen directly, but the real discovery is the connection itself. The moons are not isolated objects sharing the same planet. They form a linked physical system where orbital relationships can determine whether entire worlds remain geologically active or slowly fall silent. What Voyager 1 discovered was not simply a volcanic moon. It discovered a system. A hidden gravitational rhythm was moving energy from orbit to orbit, reshaping worlds that should have evolved very differently on their own. The eruptions on Io were simply the place where the machine became visible.